Shabbos, Daf Ayin through Ayin Vav. On Daf Ayin, the Gemara brings Machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Nassan, why the Torah singles out Havara. The Torah says, Lo Sibaru Eish B'chol Mashvasechem B'yom HaShabbos, can kindle a fire on Shabbos. It doesn't single out, doesn't enumerate the other 38 malachos. Why Havara? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi says, Lav Yatzas, other malachos of Shabbos, there's a Chi of Misa, capital punishment, and Havara is only a Lav. Rabbi Nassan Omer, L'chalek Yatzas, how many karbanos you bring if you do multiple malachas. These halachos are not so practical. We don't bring karbanos and we don't do Misas based in today, but there are a number of practical nafkaminas proposed, at least speculatively, by various achronim of this machlokes. The Aruch HaShulchan brings in machlokes Rishonim in the laws of Yom Tov. The laws of Yom Tov, there's an exception for ochel nefesh. We can cook and light fires for the preparation of food, we can carry. There's also a principle of mitoch shehutra l'tzarech, hutra nami shelo l'tzarech, that you can do things for other Yom Tov purposes as well. But there's machlokes Rishonim, according to Rashi and Tosfos and the Rosh, we say mitoch for all malachas that can be done for ochel nefesh can also be done not for ochel nefesh. According to the Rambam, it's a special halacha for hotzah and havara, for carrying and for lighting fires. Why these two? So the Aruch HaShulchan is masber that the Gemara we find mitoch about these two malachas, and there's a reason why mitoch might apply specifically to these two, because these two, even though for Shabbos to some extent they're included in malacha, but they involve separate psukim. Havara, the Gemara darshans from Vayaviru Kol B'Machana, Hotzah is Vayaviru Kol B'Machana, and Havara is from Lo Sibaru Eish B'chol Mashvasechem. He says there's machlokes whether it's Lav Yatzas, L'chalek Yatzas. Even though the Gemara has drashas, why Havara had to be singled out? It really should have been included in the general commandment of not doing malacha. But he says there is a separate pasuk. There is a separate pasuk for it, he says. And certainly if it's a Lav Yatzas and it's not included in the regular pasuk of Kol Ha'osa Malacha B'yom HaShabbos Mos Yumas, so if not included in the regular pasuk of doing malacha on Shabbos, and if it's only a Lav, it makes sense, he says, that on Yom Tov it wouldn't be Asur at all, that you say mitoch, and that there's no Asur at all of Havara on Yom Tov. So he says at the end of the day, Havara, together with Hotzah, are different from the other malachos, and the ramification is that they have a special status on Yom Tov. There's another potential nafkamina. Achronim say opposite things actually, but Achronim discuss the question of the law of grama, how it applies to Havara, grama, indirect causation. That there's a question in the Gemara whether in malachos in general on Shabbos, Machabeh, putting out fires, other malachos, whether we say only Asiyah is chayav, you're only chayav for direct action, but grama is not chayav midaraisa, or grama is chayav midaraisa. The Ikra din is that grama is not chayav, but there's a question about it in the Gemara. So the Chasam Sofer seems to say that even if you would say grama is chayav for all other malachos of Shabbos, Havara, it would definitely be patur if you say lalav yatzas, because if you say lalav yatzas, we say that it's not included in the regular pasuk of malacha. The idea that grama is chayav would be because it says lo se'asa, no malacha shall be done, including via grama. Malacha shall not be done in any manner. But havara lalav yatzas, havara is a separate thing, and havara wouldn't have the chiyuv of grama. On the other hand, the Machzeh Avram says just the opposite. Even if grama is patur in all malachas, the way we paskin, grama is patur, he says havara you'd be chayav if you say lalav yatzas. Havara you'd be chayav even begrama, because why is grama pater for other malachas? Because we don't darshan lo seyaseh, we say asiyah hu da'aser. The Torah says lo saseh chal malacha, only asiyah is aser, grama is mutter. Havara doesn't say lo saseh, it just says Havara is a lav yatzas, Havara is its own pasuk. So for Havara it might be more strict, unlike the Chasam Sofer that Havara is less strict with regard to grama. According to the Machzeh Avram, Havara is more strict with regard to grama, which has potential ramifications for cases of need, of chola, whether Havara de grama is not deraisa or it is deraisa. That would be a question. Other Rishonim and Achronim give other reasons why Havara is singled out, other than the Gemara's reasons. Tosfos, in their commentary to the Torah, Tosfos says that we would think that it's not such a malacha, it doesn't look like a major malacha, we would think that much we can do on Shabbos. Rav Hirsch is quoted as saying that, in general, there's a common motif that malacha on Shabbos is constructive work, you do something. Havara is the opposite, it's destructive, fire burns. So you might not have thought Havara is a real malacha, the Torah tells you that it is. And I sometimes want to suggest that Bizman Hazeh, Havara, in the sense of electricity, is one of the key opportunities we have for Chol Shabbos, one of the key prohibitions that we have today. Driving a car is another big one, which is Havara is one of the main malachas involved, and using electricity. he's certainly using electricity for incandescent lights, is Havara, according to many poskim, most poskim. In the 19th century, there actually was a great debate about this. Marsham wasn't sure that lighting an incandescent light was really electricity. It doesn't really burn in the sense of chemical combustion. Others, the Mlamed Lahoil and other poskim, said that it was. The filament does burn, that's why lights burn out. Incandescent lights burn out after a while because it's not a pure vacuum, and the filament does burn. It's Havara because it gets hot and emits light, even if it isn't strictly combustion. So perhaps in B'derech Drush we can say the Torah says lo sivar eish to tell you any kind of fire. Fire is important. Fire is going to be a major form of modern Chil Shabbos. Lo sivar eish b'chol mashro sechem. Havara is included in Chil Shabbos. The Gemara on Daf Ayin Aleph, the Gemara talks about if a person eats chaylev, forbidden fat, or other types of things that are prohibited. So if you eat two pieces of chaylev together, sometimes they're mitzaref, it's considered like one big eating, sometimes they're not mitzaref. So Rashi says that it depends on whether they were eaten b'kdei achilas pras, the share, the time it takes to eat a certain amount of bread, half a loaf of bread. If you eat them within that share, they're mitzaref. If you eat them not within that share, they are not mitzaref. There seems to be a contradiction in Rashi, though, because Rashi says chaylev v'chaylev, two pieces of chaylev, two kazesim of chaylev. And if there's a hefsik between them more than kedei achilas pras, it's two separate achilas, and we treat them separately. Only if the hefsik, if the space between them was more than kedei achilas pras. But in the next Rashi, when he discusses eating a chatzi zayis and a chatzi zayis, and you want to put the two chatzi zayisim together, there Rashi says they can be mitzaref insofar as the total time elapsed from the beginning of the first half of zayis until the end of the second one is kedei achilas pras. So that means that it doesn't matter, that it's not enough to say that there wasn't that much time between the two achilas, between the end of the first and the beginning of the second. That much time can't have elapsed between the beginning of the first and the end of the second, meaning the entire eating, all of the eating of both kazesim must have occurred within this time span of kedei achilas pras. That's a much tighter time span. So which is it? Is the rule that they're mitzaref as long as the gap between them is not kedei achilas pras, or is the rule that as long as the total, that has to be more than that, has to be that all the eating has to have occurred within the time frame of kedei achilas pras? Achronim debate this. There are those who want to say that when it comes to achilas isser, then we say that then we have a kula, that as long as the entire isser hasn't been eaten within the time frame of kedei achilas pras, you're not chayev. Still be aser because of chati share, but you're not going to be chayev. But achilas mitzvah, if you want to be yotzi a mitzvah like eating matzah, as long as there wasn't a hefsek, as long as the space between the end of the first and beginning of the second wasn't kedei achilas pras, you're still yotzi. That would be a great leniency. A person eats matzah, it takes him a lot of time, but as long as he didn't stop eating, as long as there was no gap between one bite and the next of kedei achilas pras, there's a tzad that you're yotzi. We generally are machmer. We try to get all the matzah in within the total kedei achilas pras, like the more stringent view. But this is something that's not clear, not totally clear, and the Rashis on our Amud are somewhat contradictory on this point. The Gemara talks about, on Ayin Beis, the Gemara talks about someone who worships Avodah Zarah, talks about the idea of being a shogeg for Avodah Zarah, how it's your chaya for Avodah Zarah, your patra on Shabbos. The Gemara tries to figure out what the case is. At one point, the Gemara suggests that the case is me'avo me'yira. A person worshipped Avodah Zarah, not because he wanted to, but either out of favor or out of fear, either out of love for someone or yira of someone. The Gemara says that's actually machlokes. Abaye and Rava. Abaye says you're chayiv in those cases, and if you did a b'shogeg, you'd be chayiv a carbon. Rava says you're patur. That's not Avodah Zarah. Unless you worship it sincerely, if you worship it out of ava and yira, you are patur. Tosha says, how can you tell me that if a person worships Avodah Zarah out of fear, he's patur, but yari val yaver? Even if you're afraid of your life, even if you're legitimately afraid of your life, you know that you're going to die if you don't worship Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is Yahar Val Yaver. You have to give up your life and not worship Avodah Zarah. Tosha says that Rava's shita is that even though, yes, you're supposed to give up your life, but if you don't give up your life, you're patur. You're not mechuyev nisa in Beis Din. You're not chayev b'diavad. Chachili, you're supposed to give up your life, but b'diavad, you aren't chayev. This is also the opinion of the Rambam. The Rambam says if someone is supposed to do Yahar Val Yaver, he's supposed to give up his life, and he doesn't, it's a chil Hashem. However, he says, even though it's a chil Hashem, he still has the status of an onus, someone who acted under compulsion. He doesn't get malchus. He certainly doesn't get misa, he says, because malchus and misa are only for people who sin willingly. Such a person is, he's wrong, he shouldn't have done it, but he's still an onus, and therefore he's not punished by death or the other types of punishments. However, the Rambam warns that's only if a person is an onus right now. A person can leave leave the land where the evil government is, the coercive government is forcing him to sin, and he doesn't, then he's doing a terrible thing. Then he's going to be nitrad min ha'olam. He's going to get Gehenna, the lowest level of Gehenna. That he can no longer claim onus. But if he can claim onus, even if it's Yahar Val Yavar, he's supposed to give up his life. But b'diavad, according to the Rambam and Tosfos, he won't get punished by Beis Din at least. Tosfos goes on and says that how can Rava say that if you're over in Meira, over in Me'ava, that you are pater? Tosfos brings a Gemara that seems to say that the only time you're pater, Gemara Avodah Zarah, the only time you're pater is if it's onus misa, you're afraid of dying, but other kinds of onus, you're still chayiv. And here it says afilu me'ava, there's no onus misa, you're pater. So what's the difference? Tosfos says it depends why you're being over. He says if a person doesn't specify exactly why he's being over, even if it's someone he's not internally, personally makabelit as a god, and he personally is doing it for other motives, but he's still going to be chayiv misa for it. But here, Agamar, he says, is talking about the person explicitly says he's only worshiping me'av or me'ira. Even if it's not explicit, he says, we can say that in a case where that's the custom, everyone worships machmas ava v'yira, that is something, if that's understood, that you're not really worshiping it because of a theological conviction, you're worshiping it out of ava and yira, then you're pater. The Gemara over there that says chayiv is talking about a case where the person, the avodah zarah in question is worshipped, doesn't have avodah zarah. Then you're going to be chayiv. The Gemara says dumya de Haman, and it explains dumya de Haman, but not dumya de Haman, that Haman was actually meira, but if a person worships someone like Haman who would be actually worshipped as an avodah zarah, then he'd be chayiv. And Agamar is talking about where you worship someone where it's clear, you say, or it's clear that the worship is only, the act of worship is only av and yira, and is not a theological expression of belief in its godliness. So Tosfos asked, so if in the case of Haman, since everyone understood it was Av and Yira, Haman was a despot, it was understood that Haman would kill you, so then Haman was Yira, so why didn't Mordechai bow down to Haman? He should have. Tosfos says, because Haman had an actual Avodah Zarah. Haman had things hanging on his neck, and that was Avodah Zarah, or because he wanted to Mekadesh Shem Shemayim. So it wasn't a question of the Ikra Din of Yahar Val Yavar, he wanted to Mekadesh Shem Shemayim. But Tosfos basically says, if you have a person and the worship is clear that it's not Avodah Zarah, you're allowed to bow down, certainly in the case where there was a danger, like in the case of Megillah, where we see what happened. If you don't cooperate with Haman and the Ikra Din, it would have been mutter, if not for the charm he wore on his neck, the idolatrous charm, or the idea of Kiddush Hashem. But it's mutter to bow down to a person, as long as it's clear that it's Ava Me'ira, you say it's Me'ava or Me'ira, or it's clear from context, he's not worshipped as a god, you're allowed to bow down to a person. There's a famous story they tell about Rav Soloveitchik, that in martial arts, the Japanese, they bow to each other, they bow to the sensei before they engage in their combat. Karate he was talking about. So the students bow to the teacher, so they asked Rav Soloveitchik, are you allowed to do that? So he said, they asked the Rav, can you do that? And he said, it's usher to do that. They asked him why, but it's not Avodah Zarah. It's clear from context, and nobody's worshiping the sensei. It's just a minhag of the Far East. It's just a minhag shtus, let's say. It's silly, but it's not Avodah Zarah. So the Rav said exactly, it's shtus. He says that because it's nonsense, that's why it's usher. You're not allowed to engage in conduct of shtus. So I never really understood why it's shtus. Bowing is a sign of respect. People in the Torah bow to kings as signs of respect. I'm not sure why bowing is less a sign of respect than kissing a hand or handshaking or standing up when someone comes into the room. I'm not sure why bowing is so much more shtus than that. But that's what the Rav held, even though Meikra Din, according to the story, even though Meikra Din is not Avodah Zarah, it's a minhag shtus, and that's why it should be avoided. The Gemara goes on discussing examples of shogeg. The Gemara talks about Omer Mutter. Someone who thinks that Avodah Zarah is Mutter, Rashi says, we're referring to the Tino Shenishba, the someone who was never learned about Avodah Zarah. That's a person who would be shogeg. The Gemara basically calls Omer Mutter a form of shogeg, that he'd be chayav a carbon for Avodah Zarah. And the Gemara says, yeah, but even on Shabbos it says you'd be chayav for that. So the Gemara says Omer Mutter is chayav a carbon, chayav a carbon for Shabbos and for Avodah Zarah. Elsewhere, the Gemara discusses what the status of Omer Mutter is in Makos regarding the laws of going to Golus for manslaughter, for inadvertent killing. The Gemara brings actually a machlokas amarayim between Rav and Abaye, whether Omer Mutter, if someone thinks you're allowed to kill, is that Karav L'Mezid? It's not a Shogeg, but is that Karav L'Mezid? It's not a Shogeg because it's too close to Mezid. And Abaye says, no, it's actually Onesu. If you don't know, you don't know. What are you supposed to do? You acted in good faith. So neither opinion seems to say Shogeg. One says Karav L'Mezid, one says Karav L'Ones. Onesu, Karav L'Ones. Tosfos here and Makas asks, so which is it? Is it Shogeg? The Gemaras in Shabbos seem to call Omer Mutter Shogeg. The Gemaras in Makas seem to say it's not Shogeg. We're remayed it from Bishgaga Prat L'Mezid, which the Gemara says means Omer Mutter according to one opinion. And they both say it's not considered Shogeg. Tosfos says normally it's called Shogeg. In Hilchos Shabbos it's called Shogeg. In Galos, because the Torah uses the word Shogeg so many times, the word Shogeg is reiterated. There's a very, very narrow standard of Shogeg, but in general it is called Shogeg. There's a major discussion in the poskim, Achronim mostly, in other contexts in Halacha, where we use the term Shogeg. Is Omer Mutter considered Shogeg or not? So for example, you're not allowed to Mavakel Isser L'Chatchila, you're not allowed to L'Chatchila nullify Isser by throwing it into a large pot of heter. We know that if a small amount of milk falls into a pot of cholent or fleishik soup, if it's small enough, it's batil, but L'Chatchila, you're not allowed to throw it in. That's called Bittul Isser L'Chatchila. And even B'diavad, if you do it b'mezid, it is Asr. We don't say Bittul. However, if it happens b'shogeg, then it's Mutter. Then we say Bittul. What if you put it in because you didn't know the halacha? You thought a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. You knew that there's a law of Bittul. You didn't know that Bittul is that's Asr to do it L'Chatchila, so you threw it in deliberately thinking it was Mutter. You're Omer Mutter. So the Taz in Yeridea says Omer Mutter is Shogegu and B'diavad it's Batal. Chasim Sofer and many other Achronim agree with the Taz. However, some Achronim disagree. Some Achronim say that no, Omer Mutter is irresponsible. That's not considered Shogeg. It's like Mezer. Tosfos really raises the question in Bechara. Tosfos says Shema. Maybe Omer Mutter is like Shogeg. If you think it's Mutter, maybe it's like Shogeg. Maybe it's not like Shogeg. In the laws of Masa Shabbos, the halacha is that if a Jew does malacha on Shabbos, then b'diavad it's aser. If he does malacha mezer, it's more stringent. If he does malacha on shogeg, b'shogeg it's still aser. Poskim say that in certain cases of dechak we can be lenient if it was done b'shogeg and be making even on Shabbos. The question is again, is Omer Mutter shogeg or mezid? So the Chai Adam, Mishnah Berurah seems to say that Omer Mutter is actually shogeg, and we can treat Omer Mutter like shogeg and have the leniencies of shogeg with regard to Ma'aseh Shabbos, similar to what the Taz says, that has a leniency of shogeg with regard to Bittul Isser L'Chatchila. Gemara in Gimel, one of the most famous Mishnayos in Masechta and Shas, they list the 39 Malachos of Shabbos. There are 40 minus 1, Arba'im Chaser Achas, Malachos and Shabbos. The Mishnah proceeds to list them. So two of them are HaKosher ve'Amater, tying and untying. So Tosfos raises the question, is Mater Shalom Anas Likshar? If you untie something without intent to retie it, you just untie it, is that Chayev or Pater? What's the issue? Several other malachas in the Mishnah says that they come in pairs, they come in inverses. For example, Hatofer Shtei Tfiros and Hakarei Manas Litvar. If you sew or if you tear with intent to resew. So tearing, which is a destructive, the opposite of Tfira, the inverse of Tfira, is only chayev if you tear with intent to sew again. Similarly, Hakosev and Mochek. Kosev is writing. Mochek is its inverse, you erase. But Mochek is only Almas Lichtov, the Mishnah says. So what about kosher mater? Do we say mater, which is undoing a knot, is only if you intend to retie it, or not? So Tosfos says tzarchian. Tosfos brings a shaila about it. He says that Rashi seems to hold. He says that Rashi seems to hold that you are chayav shalom nas likshar. The Rosh says you're not chayav shalom nas likshar. So it's machlokes v'shon. The Bir Halacha brings a different shitas. The Bir Halacha says that the first form of Drabanan, everyone says it's Aser, so practically the Nafkamina is not great, because everyone agrees, even Shalom Anas Likshar, it's Aser. Anyway, he says the Rosh, who's the main opinion, who says that Shalom Anas Likshar, your Pater, Mishnah Berurah says many Rishonim are cholik on the Rosh. We already saw Tosfos said Rashi disagrees with the Rosh. Rashi says Yechayev regardless. The Rambam, he says, and the Smag Achronim say are cholik. So the Mishnah Berurah says, first of all, many Rishonim are cholik. Furthermore, he says, even according to the Rosh, that we do treat kosher and matir like the other malachos, like tofer and like bona and soser and like the other malachos that you're not chayiv unless it's almanas to do the constructive version. So matir will not be chayiv unless it's almanas likshar. Mishnah Berurah says we already established elsewhere in his Mishnah Berurah You don't need strictly almanas to do the specific inverse, any constructive purpose. The whole point is that it can't be destructive, he says, but you don't need specifically almanas. You don't need, when it comes to tearing, we don't need specifically almanas. Litvar, he says, we say any kind of tikkun is sufficient, he says, as long as any kind of tikkun is as if you did almanas litvar, he says, and therefore who in here, if there's any constructive purpose in untying the knot, that would be chayav, even if it wasn't specifically in order to retie it. Gemara brings a statement. Rav Sheshes said if a person had a clump of earth on the ground and he picks it up, he removes it from the ground. So if it happens in his house, then he's chayav mishum bona. That's building because he's making the floor straight and not bumpy. If it happens in the field, if you do that in the field, you're chayav mishum charesh. It's a form of plowing. The Magen Avram says the minhag in his city was that they were lenient. They would hire non-Jews to clean the streets, and they would remove dung, they would remove excrement from the streets on Shabbos. So the Magen Avram says that's really a malacha d'oraisa. If a Jew would pick up manure off the floor on the street on Shabbos, really he would be chayiv, like Ar Gemara, they pick up a gavshushis, you are bona, you're fixing the street. It's like the house, with a street without bumps and lumps is a better street, so you're building the street, so that's bona. So he discusses how can we have a non-Jew do it, it's a mir lakum, and he discusses what the heter is. But I'll call upon the Magen Avram assumes that removing manure from the street is bona. It's like Ar Gemara of picking dirt off the ground. Nishmas Adam disagrees. Nishmas Adam says when Ar Gemara says gavshushis, it means gavshushis that is attached to the ground. Earth, the floor itself is lumpy, the floor has a bump, and you pull a clump of earth out of the floor, that's bona. But if the manure is just plopped on the ground and you pick it up, it was never attached, that would not be bona, certainly not midaraisa. This has ramifications for a celebrated modern discussion about shoveling snow. Ratzi Pesach Frank in the Har Tzvi discussed there was a great snow, he says, in the year, I guess there aren't that many great snows in Yerushalayim, but in Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, in the year Tufshin Yud Zayin, 1957, there was a great snow, and people wanted to know about shoveling it, he says. So he says, if the snow is still soft and it hasn't hardened and become fixed to the ground and the buildings yet, that's one thing he says. But if it's hard, nikrash, vehiglet, if it's firm and rigid and it's attached to the ground, attached to the roof, he says, then it's a question of bona, binyan and steer. So in the case where it's not attached to the ground, not attached to the buildings of the ground, he indicates it would not be bona. So in the Talei Sada, the commentary on the Har Tzvi, he says that not so simple. We have machlokes, Magen Avram and Nishmas Adam, whether animal manure on the ground, it's not attached, it's just the animal, presumably an animal, just dropped it on the ground. It's not attached to the ground. You weren't mavatal it there. It's machlokes. Magen Avram says that's daraisa. So maybe the snow also would be daraisa. He says. And Nishmas Adam would seem to be lenient. The second case, he says, where the snow is attached to the buildings, that the Har Tzvi seems to think would be bona. He says we can say that no, this is actually better than that. He says because the snow melts. Snow doesn't stay frozen permanently. Snow will eventually melt. Maybe anything which doesn't have a long-term, might last for a few days, depending on how big the snow is, how cold it is, but anything that's not permanent might not be considered attached. And then that's not considered bittul. And again, at least according to the Nishmas Avram, anything that's not batel isn't considered bonus. So again, there's basis for leniency. Gemara Nayin Daled, the Gemara talks about the laws of borer. So the Gemara has a number of intricate ins and outs, different conditions about when it is borer, when it's not borer. So the Gemara has different statements that it tries to figure out what they mean. Initially, the Gemara says that if you're borer pachas mikasher, less than a share at a time, so then it would be mutter. If you do a whole share, then you're chayiv. Less than a share is actually mutter l'chatchila. The Gemara says, since when? Are you allowed to bake pachas mikasher? Other malachas, are you allowed to do a malacha less than the share? Of course not. That's how we paskin. That's how the Acharonim mostly, or almost all paskin. The malacha less than a share. Throughout the Masechta, the end of this parak, beginning of the next parak, we're going to talk about the share of Hatzah. Throughout Masechta Shabbos, we have shiurim for how much you have to do of a malacha to be chayiv. That's all to be chayiv. But asur, it's asur even less than a share. So, for example, in the laws of cutting hair or fingernails, so it says you're not allowed to cut hair or fingernails. If you cut 2 hairs, you're chayiv. Magen Avram says, but 1 hair is asur. Like every chatzi share. Chatzi share, you eat half a kizayas of nevela or pork. It's also asur. The Mishnah Berurah says the Isra would be Daraisa. Bir Alachi explains that that's the Mashmos and the Magen Avram. All the Acharonim say that except all the Shabbos. They all say that half the share of a Malacha on Shabbos is Asr. It's Mashmos even Asr Midaraisa. Like Chatzi Sher, we paskin all over is Chatzi Sher Asr Min HaTorah. You're not chayav v'chatas, you're not chayav for it Min HaTorah, but it is an Isser Min HaTorah. The Gemara goes on discussing the laws of borer. The Gemara says that there's a distinction between being borer biyad with your hands, or a knon or a tamchoi, certain types of utensils, or a napa kavara, a sieve, which are dedicated borer tools. So napa v'kavara, you're actually chayav. Biyad is mutter. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara brings another distinction. The Gemara says ochel mitoch psoles is fine. Psoles mitoch ochel, the bad from the good, is chayav chatas. The Gemara brings a third distinction, that borer for la'alter is fine, mutter l'chatchila, borer to meniach, to let it go la'achar zman, even for Shabbos, for later on Shabbos. Even for later on Shabbos is chayav. Not so clear which of these is lahalacha and how they fit in. Do you have to have all these conditions to be chayav? Some of these conditions to be chayav. Lahalacha, however, the consensus of the later poskim is clear. Mishnah Berurah explains it nicely in his introduction to the laws of borer. He says, you're chayav on Shabbos if any one of these three conditions is met. He says, if any one by itself of the three is met, you're chayav. Psolas mitoch ochel, if you take the bad from the good, even if you do it with your hand, and even if it's miyad, you're chayav. If you do it with a kli that's derech breira bekach, like a sieve, even if it's ochel mitoch psolas, he says, and even if it's miyad, you're chayav again. And if it's kli like not the derech, if it's a napa v'kavar, if the other kinds of kli, k'nom v'tamchoy, that's also midrabanan, not midaraisa, or you're not chayav for that, patra v'laser. And the third way to be chayav midaraisa is if it is for la'achar zman, for later in the day, even certainly for the next day, even if it is ochel mitoch psolas, even if it's biyado, you are chayav. If any one of these three conditions are not met, you're chayav. If all three conditions are met, then it is mutter, even l'chatchila. The laws of borer are multifarious and quite complicated, but just to mention one or two of the issues that come up in the basic text of this Amud Gemara, this black Gemara. So the Gemara says it has to be la'alter. La'alter is mutter. So Mishnah Berurah says la'alter would be osa suda. There's actually a lot of discussion. It's very ill-defined in the poskim. What is la'alter? Magen Avraham says that la'alter would be when people come home from shul on Shabbos, that you can't stop eating borer for the suda until people come home from shul. They start leaving the shul. I don't know how long it took to walk home from shul, and how long they dallied, and how long they stayed at home before starting to eat. But it has to be, the la'alter is considered from when davening is over and people are leaving shul. Mishnah Berurah does see, though, a leniency that even if the suda takes a long time, it's a 4-hour meal, you're going to have the seder, you have a long meal somehow. It's going to take a very long time for the meal. As long as you started within la'alter of the meal, that is okay. There is actually machlokes about this, that some say that even if the meal, like Mishnah Berurah, even if it takes a long time for the meal, as long as you started close to the meal, within an hour of the meal, let's say, that's mutter. But they bring from Ravadi Yosef that he said no, that he said it has to be an hour with an actual eating. You're only allowed to be borer any specific dish within an hour of actually eating that dish. However, he says, if it's right before the meal starts, then even if the meal takes a long time, that's okay. But if it's not right before the meal starts, you have to be within an hour of eating that particular dish. Other poskim say that don't get too carried away with this hour. Hour is not really a precise share. They asked Moshe, for example, they asked Moshe that Rishonim and Beah say this language of an hour. So they asked Moshe, is it less 59 minutes not? Is it really totally on an hour? And Moshe said no. It doesn't depend on an hour. It's the time that this woman typically prepares her food. Before that, even a small amount before that is usher. Not sure if it means each woman. Women have different habits. Some prepare right before, some like to prepare early. A woman might want to prepare early in the morning, go to shul, come back. Some women are busy with other things before the kids get up. So it's unclear exactly how to define this, but it has to be, everyone agrees it has to be la'alter. And later in Shabbos, for example, preparing in the morning for Suda Shlishis is definitely not la'alter, and that is a problem. If your kavanah is that it should be for another Suda even on Shabbos, that's Asr and Chayiv, you're Chayiv Achatas. However, the Mishnah Berurah brings that if the meal was left over, if you prepared for this meal and you had some leftovers, that's fine, because you prepared it beheter, and even if someone's left over, that's okay. The truth is, there actually is a major machlokas about this. There's a major machlokas, both halves. If you borer la'alter, then you change your mind, and you decide to leave it for later, or vice versa. You borer be'isser, you're chayav for doing it later, then you decide to change your mind and eat it now. Do we look at your original intention, or do we look at in the final analysis when it actually got used or eaten? It's a vigorous discussion of the Achronim. The Ben Ish Chai and the Rav Palam goes through this question, and he actually is inclined to say that even if you do it la'alter, even if you intended to eat it right away, if you change your mind and then leave it for later, you might even be chayiv, he says. Certainly it's going to be aser. He brings a sheet that it's mutter, but he says it's chayiv, it might even be aser. The Mishnah Berurah apparently is bringing the Shulchan Aruch Harav, says it's fine. That's different, he says. That's where, if you prepare enough food for the current meal, and you served all the food, and you put it all on the table, people didn't eat all of it. So you put the rest back, and you said you have it for later. That's okay, because you were barer for now, you never changed your mind, you served it, it didn't get eaten. So then, that's not barer. But if you were barer a pound full of food, and you said, you know what, this is hard work, all this barer, I want to serve half of it now, and I'll save half of it for later, that's going to be aser, he says. That's not considered la'alter, even though initially you intended to serve it la'alter. The Gemara brings a story. It says that Rav Ami and Rav Asi once visited Rav Bevai apparently, and he threw before them, he took a basket full of fruit, full of peros, and he tossed it out in front of them. He didn't just serve it to them a little bit on their plate, he just spilled the whole thing out in front of them. So the Gemara has two pshatim why he did that. Is it because he held even ochel mitach psolos is aser? He didn't want to take out the ochel from the psolos, so he just dumped the whole thing on the table? Or he was just being generous, he wanted to say, don't worry about portions, here's the whole thing. So we hold ochel mitach psolos is mutter. But the Gemara seems to say that there's a heter in the laws of barer if you just spill the whole thing out, even if you couldn't take them out one by one, but if you just spill the whole thing out and they separate on their own, that's okay. So there are some achronim, contemporary poskim, who bring this halacha l'maisa. They asked Moshe again, if you want to separate silverware, they're all mixed together, can you just take the whole bin of silverware, just spill it all out on the table, and then just pick out the ones that you want? Moshe says, great idea, Eitz Tova. The Shmir Shabbos also brings from Rav Shalom Zalman Auerbach, who said the same thing. The Gemara seems to say, you're allowed, if you have a mixture that's hard to separate, you can just dump the whole thing out so the parts separate, and then someone else is going to go and pick out the ones that he wants. Maybe even you yourself can do that, he says, even if you can do psolos mitach ochel, it's no longer a mixture. So he says you can do that so someone else can separate, like in the case of the Gemara, where he spilled them out and they took what they wanted, even if it's normally barer, but by spilling them out, you made it no longer a mixture. And Ula, he says, maybe even you yourself can do that. You can, if you want to separate something, you can take the mixed things and just toss it out and scatter it all over the place, and then you can pick out whatever you want without worrying about barer. The Gemara says, moving from barer to tochen, the Gemara says, if you're parim silka, if you chop up a vegetable, you're chayim mishum tochen. Tosa says, this only applies to silka, which is a particularly hard vegetable, one that needs chopping, but other ochlim, which apparently because they don't normally need chopping, ordinary foods do not have the malach of tochen, ein tochen ba'ochlim. Certainly wheat, things that need to be cut and ground and prepared, do have tochen, but ordinary fruits and vegetables that are edible don't have the law of tochen. We don't actually pass like this leniency. L'chatchila, at least, we pass that tochen does apply to vegetables in general. Shulchan Aruch says if you chop up a vegetable dak into small pieces, that actually is tochen, and that's why you can't chop up grogros, figs, carobs before older people. They have trouble chewing. You can't just chop them up because that's tochen. However, the Shulchan Aruch gives you a heter. He says that's only based on the Rishonim. There's an analogy to barer, just like barer. We just said if you do it la'alter for immediate consumption, it's mutter. So if you do it chop up these vegetables for immediate consumption, that is mutter. That's eating. That's the derech of eating. However, the poskim are not happy with this. The Beis Yosef himself and other poskim say that you really shouldn't rely on this heter of la'alter, like barer. Barer, you're allowed to rely on it, but for tochen you shouldn't, and you should avoid cutting it into really small pieces. Poskim discuss what exactly are really small pieces, not so clearly defined, but really small pieces you shouldn't cut. You shouldn't rely on the heter of being tochen la'alter. There were those who were lenient, the poskim bring, that did cut things into very small pieces, but the leniency should certainly be only la'alter. If the heter you're relying on is la'alter, then certainly it has to be, this is where the Magen Avraham says his rule, that la'alter means right before the Suda, like when they leave the shul. So in Shulchan Aruch, we do pass in l'chatchila that tochen does apply to vegetables in general. However, we also pass in a leniency that you're allowed to chop meat. Meat, roasted meat, cooked meat, you're allowed to chop into very small pieces. Dak. The Mishnah Berurah explains, based on a Trumas Hadeshin, because first of all, some say, even if we say yesh tochen ba'ochlin, but only with gedulei karka, it only applies to things that grow in the ground, fruits that like wheat and stuff like that. Even poskim say that some poskim say animals are called gedulei karka. They don't grow from the ground, but animals are still called gedulei karka. They're nourished ultimately from the ground. They eat plants which grow from the ground. However, some poskim say Ein Tchina Ba'ochlim, like we saw Tosfos said. So, but tzira for these two things, that some say Ein Tochin Ela B'Gidulei Karka, and some say Ein Tchina Ba'ochlim. Even though L'chatchila Machmer for the Machmer there is Tchina Ba'ochlim, but when it comes to meat, which has this other svara that it's not necessarily Gidulei Karka, then we're lenient. However, the Rama adds that in a case where the food is not edible without being tochin, like the birds who can't eat the stuff unless it comes in really small pieces, then there is tochin because the whole kula of Ein Tchina Ba'ochlim, when Tosfos says that vegetables have the rule of Ein Tchina Ba'ochlim, and that's part of what we're samech on. Tzira for the other things. Why not? Why is Ein Tchina Ba'ochlim according to Tosfos? But there is for silka. So why silka yes and ochlim not? Because ordinary vegetables don't need tchina. You're not really doing anything that transformative to the food because they're really edible without the tochin. But in a case where the birds can't eat the stuff, then it would be a question of tochin. So the bottom line is that we pass l'chatchila or machmer, the yesh tchina ba'ochlin. There is some basis for leniency with other tirufim. In certain cases, we say ein tchina ba'ochlin. Also, the svar of ein tchina el b'gidulei karka. And if you do it miyad, there's a heter according to some poskim. However, this idea of ein tchina ba'ochlim is only when the food is edible without tochin. When it's not edible, then certainly there is tochin. On Daf Ayin Hey, the Gemara talks about tzad chilazon, someone who traps the chilazon, the marine animal that was used for getting tchelas and dyeing tzitzis and other things. Yuchayev achas. Rashi explains the chayav is because of tzeda. There's the Yerushalmi they bring that seems to say that there's no tzeda on a chilazon, but the pashtus of the Bavli, the pashtus of the without the Yerushalmi is that there is tzeda on a chilazon. There's a very interesting discussion in the poskim whether tzeda applies, the malach of trapping animals, whether it applies to animals that are so slow that they can't really get away. Even if you wouldn't trap them, they're inherently trapped because they can't move fast enough to escape you. So the Gemara does say that if you have a lame animal, an animal that's crippled and can't walk, then there's no tzeda, midaraisa at least, because it needs on me'elav. But what about an animal which is so slow, a snail? The snail is the archetypal slow animal. The tortoise, something that really can't go fast. So is there tzeda? So it's machlokes. The Tosfos Rid says that of course there's no tzeda. It's like the crippled animal. He's the only Rishon to really explicitly discuss this question. He says that it's pashut that there's no tzeda on slow animals. Therefore, he says he doesn't bring Agamar, but he brings the Shmona Shratzim. The Shmona Shratzim of the Torah enumerates by name these Shratzim. One of them is the Tzav. The Tzav, there's some debate about what it actually is. Some say it's the Chomet, which is a kind of snail. But the Gemara says later in the Masechta, the Gemara says that the Malach of Tzad applies to them. How can there be tzad on a snail? A snail is too slow, and there's no tzad on snail. So Al-Karcha, he says that tzad of the Torah must be something else, a faster moving little animal, rodent or vermin of some sort, but not something as slow as a snail. There cannot be tzad on a snail. Rashi and others do seem to say, though, that there is tzad on slow animals. They don't say it explicitly, but it seems to emerge from the other Rishonim that there is tzad even on slow animals. And the same debate occurs in our Gemara. Our Gemara said that the chilazon is subject to tzeda. So in our generation, there's a school of thought that maintains that the chilazon is a kind of snail, the Murex trunculus. They make tzitzis, they make tchelas for tzitzis out of it. And they argue that when Chazal spoke about the chilazon that was used for tchelas, whenever they refer to chilazon, they were referring to this type of snail. So one of the objections that has been raised against that is that the snail is very slow, and slow animals, the Tosfos Rid tells us, are not subject to tzad. So how can the Gemara say tzad chilazon chayev, but the snail is too slow to be tzad? The counter argument by the people who defend the Murex trunculus as the chilazon is other Rishonim disagree. That other Rishonim say that even slow animals are subject to tzeda. Rav Elyashiv they bring some contemporary poskim say that halacha were machmer for that shita, that even slow animals are shaykh do have the malach of tzeda. The bottom line is, from our Gemara, Lachar, you can infer one of two things. When it says that tzad chilazon you're chayav because of tzeda, you can infer either, assuming the Gemara means that the chayav is tzeda, you can infer either that the chilazon is not a snail, it's some kind of faster moving animal, or that the law of tzeda applies even to slow moving animals. Lachar, you have to accept one of those two propositions. The Gemara says, that people had these poultices or plasters or bandages, and they would have goo, ointment in it. And if you smooth it out, Rashi says, you're machlik takboshes elamaka, you smooth the stuff out, you're chayav mishum hamachek for smoothing out this bandage. Now, the critical question today, which comes up in many forms, with medicines, with creams, diaper creams, and toothpaste, many different types of creams and ointments and stuff of various thickness that we have today, sunscreen, you're allowed to apply these things, different types of perfumes and cosmetics, you're allowed to apply these things on Shabbos. So one of the key surim involved is mimarech. If you smooth out the ointment on the body, that can be mimarech. The Gemara never explicitly says that smoothing a cream onto the body is mimarech. You have this thing about the retia, but the retia means you're smoothing it onto the retia, and you want the stuff to be there on the retia. When you smooth something into the body and you want it to be absorbed into the skin and not just to stay there, some poskim say that that's not called marech. The Magen Avram, in a somewhat different context, Magen Avram is talking about they used to spit on the floor and then it was gross. They used to want to use their feet to rub it into the ground so it wouldn't just sit there. So Magen Avram, the Gemara talks to whether it's a question of, again, bona, about smoothing out the ground, but the Magen Avram is medayek that insofar as questions of bona of the karka don't apply, then it's mutter. Says in Magen Avram, what happened to the marech? You're taking the phlegm, the saliva, and you're smoothing it out. So he says the marech is only when you want the thing to be there on top of the other thing. You want to have a coating of the cream, of the smushy stuff on top of the other surface. Here you want it to be absorbed into the ground, so there's no marech. So a number of Achronim have tried to argue, based on the Magen Avram, anytime that the goal of the smearing is that you want the smushy stuff to be absorbed into the substrate, that's not marech. Marsham, famously, the Marsham has a note where he suggests that if you want to put a salve, some kind of ointment, unguent, onto a wound, according to the Magen Avram, it could be mutter because you don't want it to be there on the surface. That's the marech. You want it to be absorbed into the body. So that's not the marech. Ma'aseh the Marsham says there are those who are cholek on the Magen Avram, and he doesn't recommend relying on this l'chatchila. But for a cholah she'ein bo sakana, he thinks that there is basis for leniency, and some poskim do accept this idea of the Magen Avram to some extent or another, that at least in the case of significant need, like for a cholah, even if it's ein bo sakana, you're allowed to actually put on these creams. But of course, this heter is only if you actually want the cream to be absorbed into the body. If you want the cream to stay on the surface to be a kind of shield against other things, that's certainly us. That's marech gomer l'chol. But if you want it to be absorbed into the body, then there are those who are lenient in the case of cholah, even cholah she'ein bo sakana. Even according to those who are machmer and don't allow that, what they do allow is to just put the stuff on without rubbing it in. You can just dab it on, being very careful not to smush it, just put it on, and that's okay. And the post command that even though you're going to put a band-aid on top of it, or you're going to wear clothing on top of it, and that will result in the friction, the rubbing will eventually make it get rubbed in, that's okay. That's kilach hayad, that's not your kavana, so that's okay. You're not doing it b'yadayim. That's what post can generally recommend. If a baby needs diaper rash or something like that, ideally it should be put on without rubbing. Although there is some basis for rubbing in the poskim, if it's a question of choli, certainly if it's a question of choli, there is some basis for actually rubbing it in if that's necessary. Similarly for toothbrushes, the Tzitz Eliezer says, poskim of the last half century or so have discussed whether using toothpaste on a toothbrush, there are many different possible isurim involved in brushing teeth on Shabbos. One of them is mimarech, you're smoothing out the toothpaste. Tzitz Eliezer says maybe it's not mimarech based on the Magen Avram, you don't want it to be there on your teeth, you want it to go away, you want it to be rubbed into the teeth. He says no, because he says in the case of the Magen Avram on the ground, you want it to be, you don't want the saliva, you want it to go away, you don't want it to be here at all. But here, you want the toothpaste on the teeth, at least for a small amount of time, so they can get rid of the dirt. So maybe that's worse than the Magen Avram. He says, well, nice, we saw the Marsham, there are some Achronim who did say it's like the Magen Avram, so it's a Shalom Achronim, whether that's mutter or not. L'chatchila, we try to be machmer, but there is some basis for leniency. The end of the paragraph that talks about if you take out different types of stuff, tevin, straw, different shiurim for different types of products, and the share, the simple rule is that for each one, it's a share of how much you need to be, whatever use that item has, you have to get, the share is the amount that it would be useful to have of that item. What if you have less than a share of two different items, but together there's enough to be a whole share of either, a whole share of both? The Mishnah says, Ein mitzdarfen. Pnei shelo shavu b'shiyurei, and since the shiurim are different, they're not mitzdarfen. Not really relevant l'chatchila. L'chatchila, it's also even less than a share, as we said earlier. But it has some interesting applications, this halacha. The halacha is that when it comes to eating on Yom Kippur, you can't eat, you can't drink. But the halacha is eating different types of foods, eating gumdrops and carrots are mitzaref, drinking apple juice and water are mitzaref to the share. However, the Shulchan Aruch says, achila v'shtia eina mitzarefus. The Gemara says, the Shulchan Aruch says, eating and drinking together are not mitzaref if you have less than a share of each. Magen Avraham says the same halacha applies to brachas. He says there's a share of how much you eat for bracha for bracha achrona, bracha rishona. You always make a bracha rishona. Bracha achrona, there's a share. Kizayas, revius. He says eating different food is mitzaref to a bracha achrona on food. Drinking different drinks is mitzaref to make a bracha achrona on the drinks. However, he says eating and drinking is not mitzaref, just as it's not on Yom Kippur, it's not mitzaref. Here also, it's not mitzaref. So you drink half a revius of water and you eat half a kizayas of potato, they're not mitzaref. Other Achronim disagree. Other Achronim say, no, they are mitzaref. Yom Kippur is a special svara. It's totally on Yishuv Hadas. It has to make you feel refreshed. And eating and drinking together, the Gemara says, they're not miyas v'daite. But here they are mitzaref. Moshe Feinstein says, no, he says that the Iker is like the Magen Avram because of our Mishnah. The Mishnah says when things don't have the same share, they're not mitzaref. So the Yom Kippur is a different issue. Yom Kippur is totally on Yishuv Hadas. But in general, we have the klal of our Mishnah. Anytime the halacha, there's a halacha that applies to two different things, but they have different shiurim, each one has a share, and the two categories of items have a different share, and you eat less than a share of each one, less than its own share, they're not mitzaref, because we apply this klal, kol she'ein shiureim shavas, then they're not mitzaref. So again, if you ate two things that have the same bracha achrona, they're both bar nefashos, half a revius of water, and half a kazayis of potato, Moshe agrees to the Magen Avram that since the share is not shava, one's a revius and one's a kizayis, they're not mitzaref, and you wouldn't make a bracha achrona.